I want to thank God that He has allowed me to have such a great library of books. Now, I've organized them according to country. When I hear stories of what Jesus has done through history, how Jesus has changed lives through the gospel and Bible translation, I have to get the backstory and find out what really happened. Find out the weaknesses and strengths and even the faults, but also the victories. Mostly the victories of what happened through the Holy Spirit definitely moved in history, and I want to find out how did He do it? Who are the people that God used in history? And so I've divided my top level of my bookshelf as all of my missionary biographies according to nation. The first section I have is for India, of course, because I've lived over 10 years in India trying to help the churches and praying with Indian Christians and seeing the change that has happened in their lives. And so after I have all my books about India and what God has done in India, then I have books about Vietnam, people who've been changed and raised up by God through Jesus Christ in Vietnam. And then Cambodia. I have stories of redemption in Cambodia, changed lives, and then China, and then Japan. Stories that will blow your mind about Japan and what God did in China. And then I have books of what God has done in African American lives. I have an entire section of African Americans who've shown the love of Jesus even through the difficulties of their lives through history. After the African American books, I have books of Jews, two different Jews that endured the Holocaust as Jewish people survived, and then they turned to Christ even after the Holocaust. This is a miracle story of how Jesus transformed their lives and gave them a ministry to all the other Jews in Israel today. Then I have a section of books of what God has done to change Muslims and bring them to Christ, because the Muslim world is a difficult place to shine the light of Christ. It's against the law. The Muslims persecute and kill anyone who would turn to Christ. But in Afghanistan and Pakistan and the Middle East and Palestine, Bangladesh, Iran, and even in September 11th, we see something that God did and how He changed people's lives and reversed the attacks of Satan. And we learn what God did in the Muslim world through these books. And then finally, I have books about Africa, what God has done in Africa, on the continent of Africa, in different nations, to bring people to Christ, raising up African Christians through all 2,000 years of church history. And then after the missionary stories, then I get into what God has done to reach the poor and people who have a specific burden to reach slums, poor communities, inner cities, and how they go and live amongst the poor like little Mother Teresa's, and they've devoted themselves to Jesus and Jesus alone, and that's changed entire inner cities and slums in different sections of the world that are suffering. And so let me go through these books.